So our first speaker is José Padin from Puerto Rico. José is an Associate Professor of Sociology at Portland State University and an active member of the academic labor movement in Oregon. José has been involved in the labor movement at all levels, from organizing a strike campaign at Portland State to supporting union campaigns at other universities, to being an elected member of the executive committee of the National AAUP-Collective Bargaining Congress. From 2016 to 2020, José was also president of PSU-AAUP, the union representing faculty and academic professionals with more than half-time appointments at PSU, and has been on the Portland Workers' Rights Board since it was formed in the late 1990s. José, thank you so much for being our opening speaker.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you very much. Hi, you all, sisters, brothers, comrades, fellow academic workers. Really, many thanks to all of you and also to the organizing committee for this gathering. May this be the start, really, of a new form of resistance, because we need it badly. And greetings from the land of the Taínos, the site of disaster capitalism for over 120 years after the invasion by the United States. My grandfather, actually, before we had it, second-class citizenship. We have colonial citizenship now, but we didn't used to have it before. He was part of the first cohorts that were rounded up and sent to either the Tuskegee Institute or the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Puerto Rico was incorporated into the structures of racial oppression at the turn of the 20th century. So we have a long legacy here. I want to bring up a shared screen to be able to show some suggestive graphics as I speak. And as I do this, I think you are able to organize your screen so it's a split screen. I don't know if I can do it, but we are going back, just like being in the classroom all over again. Disaster capitalism is appropriately the theme for this gathering, and an organizing strategy. What is going to be our organizing strategy and our long-term view? And so the question for us here that I was asked to kind of provide some framing, and by the way, any of us could have done this framing, it's just that there's a lot of things that need to be done today in this gathering, and this is the one that fell on my lap. So it's just my personal take. We'll see what ideas we harvest, but disaster capitalism, that's the first thing that we kind of need to define for ourselves and then start thinking in light of what it is, what our organizing strategies ought to be. And so my understanding of disaster capitalism is that it is one piece, one tactic that is part of a longer term plan, a long game of the ruling class in our country. And I think we need to understand it as a long game that goes back to at least 1947. And it's the most recent installment. It's aimed at dismantling the capacity of the state, of government, to respond to the demands of organized citizens. And it aims to also dismantle and decimate the capacity, our capacity, to place demands on the state to provide the things that we need. And the specific tactic that we call disaster capitalism refers to is the use of disasters, real or manufactured, as an opportunity to dismantle parts of the state, to weaken our movements, and to create a sense of chaos that allows for privatization, deregulation, austerity, and so on. It provides an opportunity to tie down the state, to block its ability to meet our needs in the midst of disaster. And when the state proves to be incompetent or incapable because it has been tied down, then it is targeted for its failure to act. The results that we see as part of the long game in higher education are kind of just a specific instance of what we see everywhere else. Disinvestment in public higher education, casualization of labor, and growing student debt. Now, what motivated this gathering is the fact that we've faced a disaster, a health disaster, that is providing an opportunity for the neoliberal agenda to attack our neck of the labor woods, as it were. But the gamut of disasters, natural disasters, Katrina in New Orleans, Hurricanes Irma and Maria in Puerto Rico, health disasters, COVID, and fabricated social and political disasters. What we're living through currently might qualify as that. The thing about disasters and crises is they don't automatically favor the interest of business, and they haven't always done so. Under the right circumstances, major disaster or crisis opportunities have also been moments when working people and freedom movements of the oppressed have been able to seize the initiative to build collective responses to those disasters and bring about broad social transformation. We saw that in a major way in our history. All of a sudden, history matters. That's one of the great things this last year. All of a sudden, history matters in a society that just has collective amnesia. The Great Depression, World War II, the Vietnam War were junctures where working people's movements led to the forming of industrial unionism and the legal framework for labor organizing, and where the Black, Chicano, Puerto Rican indigenous freedom movements were able also to seize the moment and successfully dismantle the legal structures of the old Jim Crow. And the powerful in those two critical junctures, the Great Depression and then what led to the Civil Rights Movement, the powerful, the ruling class in this country realized that it would be important to decimate the movements of working people and the freedom movements of oppressed racial groups so that we wouldn't be able to seize the moment in any future disaster. And that's what they have done. And after those two major moments of social change, the rise of our industrial labor movement and the successes of the Black freedom, the indigenous freedom movements, the response to both has been very similar, and it's telling. First, go on the offensive. Second, criminalize. Third, deplete the capacity, the organized capacity of the freedom movements or of labor, and then step into the void that creates and redirect the thrust for justice through co-optation, intentional divisions, divide and conquer, and again, criminalization. So criminalization of labor was kind of the first chapter in this. 1935 was when the Wagner Act was passed in the United States that provided the framework for legal protection in labor organizing. Within 12 years of the passing of the Wagner Act, a Congress that was taken over by Republicans in 1946 and with the support of Southern Democrats gutted labor legislation completely to criminalize a whole range of tactics that had made our labor movement strong. Closed shops, secondary strikes, boycotts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It criminalized being a communist or a socialist. There could not be any union leaders. And those had been the folks who organized our strike capacity in the 1930s. Criminalization was the backlash. Now, this is what the map looked like just 12 years. This is a story reminiscent of Reconstruction and then the end of Reconstruction. The backlash against, in this case, the movement of working people. Within 12 years of the first major gains for labor organizing in our country, already 18 states had passed laws, okay, within the first 7 years to bring to us a business supremacist regime that goes by the dishonest name of right to work. Because the 1947 legislation, Taft-Hartley, created an opportunity, a loophole that allowed states to pass state-level legislation to take away fair share from unions, to start decimating and depleting them. These states provided a base for launching a long-term offensive against organized labor, and we haven't recovered since then. That's the first chapter of that. Now, the second chapter of this is after the successes of the indigenous freedom movement and the Black freedom movement in the 1960s, by 1967, the response was criminalize and deplete, okay, both the Black and indigenous labor movement. And the result of criminalization of these freedom movements was first evisceration of the Black community and a complete reshaping of our political map. And that reshaping of the political map presents for us the biggest challenges, and I think our strategy against the tactic of disaster capitalism needs to confront that. The criminalization of Black and brown freedom movements, and together with the criminalization of labor, these two major chapters in our recent history, have meant overall the dismantling of working class resistance in our country. The criminalization of Black and brown people in our country is a twofer. It is racial injustice in its own right, and at the same time, it is an attack, the most vulnerable, and I would say the most radical and class conscious elements of our working people in our country. So this dismantling, okay, through the reshaping of our political map. And so with the vacuum created by the destruction of our labor and of our freedom movements, a vacuum is created, and that vacuum has been filled by racist and fascist politics. Racist politics since 1967, the war on Black and brown people, the thinly veiled war on crime, war on drugs, that have created mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex, and massive felon disenfranchisement, which is disenfranchisement of Black and brown people, but also of working people. Now, the result of these two things, the map that is really familiar to all of us. I left the 2016 one because we can really eyeball how fragile the gains in a couple of states, but this is the map that overlays kind of red and blue states for 2016 with all of the states that have right to exploit workers laws, the misleadingly named right to work states. The correlation is almost perfect. A couple of states stand out as exceptions, Nevada, but Nevada happens to have a very active organizing labor movement in spite of the fact that there's no legal protection. So what Nevada tells us is that, and it shows the way that all of this ground that we have lost in red is winnable. Okay. Now, and the absence and this vacuum, who is organizing over half of working people in the United States? It's not organizations of the oppressed, and it's not unions. Okay? They are being organized by racist political agendas, and they are the base for our current fascist offensive. Now, fascism in and of itself is scary enough. It is doubly scary that it has mass support by over half of the American working class. And it is happening in places where there aren't working class organizations. That suggests to us some work ahead that we should take into account in our strategy. Now, with this redrawing of the map, taking the power away from freedom movement and working people, and reorganizing more than half of working people, yes, disproportionately white, around racist and fascist agenda, we continue to lose our rights. Most recently, the changing of the Supreme Court and the Janus decision, and currently right now, a case being considered by the Supreme Court. Again, this is the Texas et al. Versus essentially now the United States to repeal the ACA. Look at the states that initiate, the plaintiffs. The check mark once again identifies the states in this legal controversy that are employer right to exploit states. Literally all of them. Okay. So once again, now, the ACA, our labor organizing framework, the Democratic Party, when we look at blue areas just happen to be areas where we have some political voice and we have none in these others. We need to rebuild this power. Now, bringing it back to home, I just want to suggest some of the priorities for us as academic labor so that we look broadly, we have a broad view when we develop kind of our own strategies within our quote industry. I think that we need to extend our labor organizing in our locals, in our federations, in our internationals. A percentage of our effort needs to go to business right to exploit states. For us in academic labor, maybe it means helping organize universities, campuses, and places where they're not organized, even if they live in right to exploit states. And then there's all of these other issues that are racial justice issues, but they're also issues that weaken labor hugely. We need to, not individually, I mean our movement and our organizations need to invest time and effort in defunding criminalization, ending voter suppression, legalize immigrant workers. These three categories, criminalization, voter suppression, and the persecution of immigrant workers, means the disenfranchisement of huge swaths of working people, okay? We need to be able to fight these things back as our struggle in our unions, as we organize our universities and the academic sector. I think we need to invest time, effort, and resources in supporting and pushing forward these struggles. Okay. Those are my thoughts in terms of framing a conversation and maybe generating some ideas. I share them with you humbly. I think I've reached the conclusion that these are priorities for my effort as a labor activist and as an anti-racist activist. And I think I want to bring these priorities into everything I do, and I hope our movement can do it as well. Appreciate the time and the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you, Jose.